Dear viewers and my supporting students, I welcome you all to my YouTube channel once again. And today I am going to deal with Sharing Tradition. Sharing Tradition is an essay by an American writer, Frank LaPena. And this essay basically concentrates on the importance of oral tradition. Actually, the importance of passing over the oral tradition from one generation to another. That means from previous generation to the upcoming generation. Means the basic key, or you can say the basic term, the key term of to understand this essay is oral tradition. Oral tradition is the key term to understand this essay. And before we go further into the essay, let's understand first what is oral tradition. Oral tradition is a form of art. Oral tradition, according to Frank LaPena, according to the essays, the writer says, oral tradition is a form of art. Why? Because oral tradition has the treasure of knowledge, information. It shares through oral tradition. Our previous generations share their knowledge, information, their beliefs, their concepts, their ideologies and opinions to the younger generations. The previous generation, they share their experience, their knowledge, their opinions, their views, their ideas, okay, their information, the knowledge of their life, from the treasure of their life, right? They pick out from the treasure of their life and experience, they pick out the important information, the ideal moral values, cultural values, traditional values, and they share with the new generation, the upcoming generation. So oral tradition has different forms. It has the forms of stories, the folktales. It has the forms of riddles. It can sometimes take the form of the proverbs, sometimes ceremonies, sometimes different rituals. For example, the examples of folktales you can say, the examples of stories, ballads, or you can say riddles, गाउँ खाने कथाहरू, त्यसपछि proverbs, उखानहरू, भनाइहरू, त्यसपछि different ceremonies or rituals. जस्तै हामी के एक्जाम्पल दिन सक्छौँ भने हाम्रा प्यारेन्ट्सहरू, ग्रान्ड प्यारेन्ट्सहरू, our parents or grandparents, when we were growing up means during our childhood, our parents, our grandparents or great grandparents, they used to tell us stories. And those stories had moral values. Those stories had some moral lessons. With the help of their stories, they wanted to share the moral values that they had learned from their life or from their previous generation. Our parents also learned from their parents, and our grandparents, they learned from their parents, from great grandparents. Means from generation to generation, the transmission of, you can say, the transmission of moral, cultural, religious values from one generation to another generation means, one generation means previous generation to the young generation, the new generation. This process has been going on from time immemorial, since time immemorial. We cannot recall the exact date when the tradition of transmitting, the tradition of sharing the stories or information, since when it started. We can't say for exact date exactly. Means though our grandparents, you can say, though our grandparents or great grandparents, they were not educated, they didn't attend any school or college or university, they have in their memory long stories, poems, proverbs, riddles, right? Sometimes you see, sometimes the educated people also fail to answer their questions. the questions, the riddles they ask, the riddles our great grandparents, our previous generation, right? Sometimes when they ask for the riddles, the young generation, though they are attending schools, college, universities, they are unable to answer their questions sometimes. So just imagine how they remembered the long stories, though they did not do any LBH, right? In schools and colleges, we often see the students, they recite the lessons, they recite the whole poem, they learn by heart the whole poem, the stories they have, they read the stories again and again, and then they remember. But these sort of things, they were, though not available, means they did not go to any schools, college, universities, they were illiterate, let's say. Even if they were illiterate, they have the treasure of knowledge, they have in their memory the ideas, the opinions, the views, the ideals, right? The ideals, they had the ability to understand the natural world, right? How they created the ideals, how they created the ideal position, they created, that is called niche, the ideal position that they created. Few, you see, with the growth of age, almost everyone, with the growth of age, everyone becomes elders, no matter, no doubt. With the growth of age, everyone, you become, I become, everyone becomes elders with the growth of our age. But only few people, only few elders among the elders who become elders just by the growth of their age, among them, only few elders, they have the ability to understand the world, they have the ability to understand the natural world, and they established an ideal position. The ideal position they established is called niche. The author has used the term niche to refer to an ideal position they created, means our grandparents. So हामी पनि हाम्रो हजुरआमाले, हजुरबुवाले कथाहरू भन्नुहुन्थ्यो। हामी केटाकेटी हुँदा, हामी सानो हुँदा, हामी जब हुर्किरहेको थियौँ, हामी हुर्किरहेको बेला जुन हजुरबुवाले, हजुरआमाले हामीहरूलाई कथा सुनाउनुहुन्थ्यो, कविता सुनाउनुहुन्थ्यो, रिडल्सहरू, गाउँ खाने कविताहरू, कथाहरू, गाउँ खाने कविता, that is riddles. त्यसपछि proverbsहरू, उखान टुक्काहरू, ceremoniesहरू, हैन, ritualsहरू, chants भने मन्त्रहरू, हैन, भगवानको स्तुति, प्रार्थना, हैन। त्यसपछि sermons भनेको प्रवचनहरू, धार्मिक प्रवचनहरू, धर्म कर्मका कुराहरू, देवी देवताका कथाहरू जुन सुनाउनु हुन्थ्यो, त्यसको उद्देश्य के थियो? What was the intention? What was their intention? Of course, their intention was to hand over the culture. They actually wanted to hand over the culture, the tradition, the customs, the rituals that they followed. They wanted the young generation to follow. They wanted us to follow the same tradition, culture, and the ideals, standard, moral values. They wanted us to learn, they wanted us to adopt the moral values they had learned in their lives, right? From their generation, from their previous generation. And that is why we can say oral tradition is transmission of the moral values, cultural values, with the help of folktales, ballads, riddles, proverbs, ceremonies, chants, sermons, rituals, and so on. So I said oral tradition has different forms. For example, we have in Hindu culture, we have the custom of worshipping Tulasi plant. We regard Tulsi as God, right? The presence of God. There is the presence of God or goddesses in Tulasi, and we worship. That is, पिपलको रुखमा हामी जल चढाउँछौँ, पानीले पूजा गर्छौँ। त्यो भनेको के हो त? त्यो एउटा फिजिकल, that is practice, the oral practice कुनै लिखित रूपमा उहाँहरूले हाम्रा ग्रान्डप्यारेन्ट्सहरूले हजुरबाहरूले कुनै किताबमा पढेका थिएनन् कि तुलसीको पूजा गर्नुपर्छ कुनै किताबमा लेखेको लिखित रूपमा रिटन फर्ममा उहाँहरूले पढेको होइनन् कि पिपलको रुखलाई हामीले पूजा गर्नुपर्छ त्यसमा भगवान बस्नुहुन्छ भनेर बिकज द्याट इज ओन्ली spiritual things there is no any scientific evidence science that is away from. But when we modern generation when we understand when science has proved that tulsi has the ability to cure so several physical problems, it has the ability to boost up our immunity power. Now we understand the importance, the value of tulsi. त्यसै गरी जुन जात्राहरू हुन्छ जस्तै कि गाई जात्राको बेलामा हैन लाखे डान्स भयो धान नाच भयो डिफ्रेन्ट कल्चरमा हरेक कल्चरमा हामी के हुन्छौँ भने कुनै विशेष कस्टमहरू छ कस्टम्सहरू त्यो कस्टम्सहरू जस्तै कि धान नाच भयो जस्तै कि लाखे डान्स भयो लाखे नाच गाई जात्रामा त्यस्तै मछिन्द्र रातको जात्रा हुन्छ रथ यात्राहरू यो जुन जात्राहरू जुन हामी सेलिब्रेट गर्छौं all these celebrations right different forms of dance हैन जस्तै हामी एउटा एक्जाम्पल लिन सक्छौं भेरी लाइभ एक्जाम्पल बर्निङ एक्जाम्पल जस्तै मैथिली कल्चर in Maithili culture during the marriage ceremony in Maithili culture the group of women they sit together and they sing songs right marital songs विवाहमा गीत गाउँछन् महिलाहरू मैथिली कल्चरमा भयो हैन महिलाहरू बसेर गीत गाउँछन् त्यो गीत कुनै उहाँहरूले these women they did not learn these songs in any book. It was not written in any books, right? They learned those songs विवाहमा जुन हैन म्यारेज सेरेमनीमा जुन गीतहरू गाउँछन् मैथिली कल्चरमा महिलाहरूले त्यो गीतहरू तिनीहरूले सिकेका होइनन् they did not learn it from books. They learned it from their parents, from their great grandparents, from their previous generation. So these are the forms of oral tradition. There are different forms of oral tradition. You understand oral tradition means orally जुन प्र्याक्टिसहरू आइरहेको छ हाम्रो प्रिभियस जेनेरेसनबाट हामी गर्दै आएका छौं सिकेर आएका छौं हैन जुन हामी फलो गर्दै छौं त्यसको basically you don't find those things in written form. Yes, modern because of the technology, because of the media, powerful media and development in technology, right? Communication technology, what has happened? Those things are now written. Some people, those who are interested, they can write and that can be found in the written forms nowadays. So what he wants to say, people, that means young generations, they don't think timely and regret later. Means people, young generation, they don't listen to the oral tradition. They don't depend on the oral tradition and they ignore them. But when the parents or grandparents, when they are no more in the world, when they pass away, then they feel the importance of their knowledge, the knowledge of the previous generation, and then they say, oh, I did not pay attention to my parents or my grandparents. They wanted to tell us, they wanted to teach us something important, something valuable, something moral, something religious, something cultural. We did not pay attention to them and they regret later, right? And modernization, in modern age, it is very difficult. It is easy to say that we should save the oral tradition. It is easy to write about the oral tradition, but it is difficult to practice. Means because of the modernization, because of the modern trend, you can say modern trend, changing trend in modern life, modern lifestyle development, and because of the new technology growth and development, invention of new technology, right? With technology, we are not able to give time to the oral tradition. What was orally means we don't have time to listen to the stories of our parents and grandparents. Means हाम्रो जेनेरेसनमा कमसेकम हामीले सुन्यो, हामीले कथाहरू सुन्यो प्यारेन्ट्सबाट, ग्रान्ड प्यारेन्ट्सबाट, हामी रिचुअल्सहरूमा जस्तै कि अहिलेको यङ जेनेरेसनलाई, मोडर्न जेनेरेसनलाई अहिले सोद्धाखेरि घरमा जुन अनेक किसिमको रिचुअल्सहरू, सेरेमोनिजहरू जुन प्र्याक्टिसमा छ त्यसको बारेमा सोद्धाखेरि तिनीहरूलाई केही पनि थाहा हुँदैन. दे डोन्ट इभन नो, राइट? जस्तै कि फर इक्जाम्पल कसैलाई एक किसिमको इक्जाम्पल ल्याउँ, गोत्र सोधिदियो भने तिमी कुन गोत्रको हो? गोत्र मलाई थाहा छैन कुन गोत्र. मिन्स young generation, the modern generation, they don't give that much importance to the oral tradition. That is the focus point here. Modernization and new technology destroy the natural world. Means modernization, with modernization and new technology, we become artificial. We become more and more artificial. We get away from, we remain far away from, we go far away from the natural world. We don't understand the natural world. Oral tradition is an educational tool of understanding the natural world. Oral tradition is an educational tool of understanding the natural world. Means our previous generation, they viewed the world, their understanding about the natural world with the help of, on the basis of their understanding about the natural world, about the mountains, about the importance of rivers, about the importance of the forest, the trees. With these, you can say, base, with these standards, they formed an ideal, they formed a belief, an ideal position. That is why we, the young generation, they have the responsibilities. Young generation, the writer says, the essayist wants to say that young generation must take the responsibilities of carrying out the tradition that they inherited from their ancestors, from their previous generation, from their parents, grandparents or great grandparents. हामीले जुन कुरा सिकेका छौं, जुन नलेज, जुन आइडियाज, जुन इन्फर्मेसन, विचारधाराहरू, हैन, जुन मूल्य र मान्यताका कुराहरू जुन हामीले आफ्ना प्रिभियस जेनेरेसनबाट सिकेका छौं, त्यो कुरा चाहिँ हाम्रो जिम्मेवारी हो. त्यसलाई हामीले जीवित राख्नुपर्छ. टु कीप दोज आइडियल्स, टु कीप दोज मोरल भ्याल्युज, इथिकल भ्याल्युज अलाइभ. It is our responsibility to maintain them. If we don't maintain them, then these moral values will be forgotten. And in the days to come, the young generations, the modern generation, the new generation, when they ask about the moral values and cultural values, the significance of the ethical values, then we will have no answer. So young generation have the responsibility. It is our role to play. Means both the old generation and young generation, when they both play their roles, right, honestly, efficiently, only then the ideal world, the ideal society, right, can be established. Further, the writer says, we claim that we go to schools, colleges, universities to gain knowledge. But actually, he says, it is not our passion for knowledge. We go to schools, colleges, universities not because we have passion for knowledge, we have passion for learning something, but it is our obligation, it is our compulsion. We go to schools, colleges, universities, means we attend schools and universities and college because of necessity. It is out of obligation, compulsion, because we know if we don't go to schools, college, universities, if we don't get certificates and degrees, we won't have good job in the days to come. We won't have established career, we don't have good career, and our economic condition will be worse. We will have to regret later in life. That's why, out of necessity, it is out of necessity that we go to schools, college and universities. That is another part of learning. That is another part. That is for attending. That is for obtaining. That is for achieving degrees or certificates so that we can have good job in the days to come. But this oral tradition, those who are interested in oral tradition, they have the passion for knowledge, they have the thirst for knowledge. Thirst for knowledge means they want to learn something from their parents, from their previous generation, because the previous generation, they have lived more lives, they have experienced life more than us, right? They have lived more than us because of their long experience, with the nature, with people, with culture, with tradition, with rituals. They have some important, you can say, some important information, some important ideal positions, ethical values, and that's why we should adopt them, we should learn from them. Yes. And now we can say oral tradition. Writer says oral tradition sometimes can be written, can be found in written form, but when they are found in written form, sometimes there is the communication gap, sometimes there is misunderstanding. By oral tradition, our parents, our previous generation, they wanted to communicate something, they wanted to say something, but while converting that oral tradition into written form, while writing that, some researchers or some experts, right, when they make research, they go to the field and they ask, they interrogate, they have communication with the elderly people. From elderly people, they want to learn something, they want to know something, they want to get information. While getting those information, sometimes they misunderstand, or sometimes the elderly people, they tell them those things that they want to listen from them. जुन कुरा वास्तविक कुरा चाहिँ नभनिकन जे सुन्न चाहन्छन्, जस्तै रिसर्च गर्ने व्यक्तिहरूले गएर एल्डरली पिपलहरुसँग केही सोध्दाखेरि, केही इन्फर्मेसन लिँदाखेरि जे चाहन्छन् तिनीहरू, जे सुन्न चाहन्छन् त्यही कुरा भनिदिन्छन्. Elderly people, they say exactly the same thing, or sometimes they misunderstand, and sometimes because of their misunderstanding, what happens, that is found in written form. Once the oral tradition is converted, it's given a written form, it's given a modified as written form, as a written tradition, then there may be the chance of misinterpretation. There is chance of misinterpretation. There is no chance of reinterpretation. Just like oral tradition ma ke cha, oral tradition can be corrected. Right? But once it is found in written form, लिखित रूपमा एकपटक आइसकेपछि, सपोज जस्तै कि एउटा किताब छ, एउटा किताबमा केही कुरा लेखिएको छ, त्यो गलत इन्फर्मेसन पनि यदि बाइ द वे लेखिएको छ भने त्यो अब त्यसलाई सच्याउन गाह्रो हुन्छ. Once it is found in printed form, once it comes in printed form, it is difficult to correct that. Furthermore, the writer says oral tradition can be easily modified if the materials need corrections. Oral traditions, when they pass from one generation to another generation, there can be chances of misinterpretation, miscommunication, misunderstanding the intention. And if this possibility remains, means if there is the possibility of misinterpretation, miscommunication, or you can say some errors are found, they can be corrected. Oral traditions can be corrected easily. But once the oral traditions come in the printed form, that means if they are converted into the form of books, it is difficult to correct them. So oral traditions are easy to correct, whereas the written forms of tradition, the written information, written ideas, opinions, and views, they are hard to, you can say, correct. Once the oral content materials get published as book, it is hard to correct the errors. There can be the chances of errors in the oral traditions. If there are the chances of errors in oral traditions, that can be easily corrected. But once they are published as books, it is difficult to correct them. Now, next point the writer shares with us. He says, for artists means here writers. He refers to writers, the literary figures, literary writers. For artists, oral traditions are clues to understand the vision, concept, and understanding of the natural world by our previous generations. हाम्रा previous generationsले, हाम्रा पुर्खाहरूले हैन, हजुरबा हजुरआमाहरूले, यिनीहरूले our previous generations, उहाँहरूले हाम्रो यो नेचरल वर्ल्डलाई कसरी भिजुअलाइज गर्नुभएको थियो, कसरी हेर्नुभएको थियो, कुन दृष्टिकोणले हेर्नुभएको थियो, त्यसमा maybe sometimes there can be some mistakes also. It is not necessary that all the traditions, oral traditions, they must be taken for granted. Some might need modifications with the growth of time. समयको परिवर्तन अनुसार, समयको चेन्ज, जस्तै पहिलेको अहिले जुन रोगहरूको a number of diseases are found. You know, almost everyone you will find, almost every home you will find patients of diabetes, patients of pressures, हैन. अब त्यस्तो कन्डिसनमा सबै ओरल ट्रेडिसन्सहरू रिलिजियस भयो अथवा सोशल भयो, ट्रेडिसन्सहरू एडप्ट गर्न, फलो गर्न may be hard, may be difficult, maybe not possible at this age, at this time. So sometimes what happens, some traditions, some oral traditions that need modification, some can be changed, some can be modified, but almost all of them, they are the understanding, the knowledge of their understanding, they are based on their understanding of the natural world. So त्यो बेला हाम्रा पुर्खाहरूले यो संसारलाई, यो नेचरलाई, प्रकृतिलाई कसरी लिएका थिए, कुन रूपमा लिएका थिए, तिनीहरूको भिजन के थियो, कन्सेप्ट के थियो, त्यो कुराहरूलाई झल्काउँछ ओरल ट्रेडिसन्सले, त्यो राइटरको बनायो, राइटर्सहरूले यसलाई क्लुको रूपमा लिन्छन्. एन्ड again now finally the writer says, younger generation means new generation should preserve and promote the values and standards and the ideals they inherit from the predecessors. आफ्नो नयाँ पुस्ताले आफ्नो आफूभन्दा अघिल्लो पुस्ताबाट सिकेका कुराहरू, राम्रा कुराहरू, हैन, मोरल भ्याल्युजका कुराहरू, आदर्शका कुराहरू, राइट, देन स्ट्यान्डर्ड, मूल्य मान्यताहरू जुन सिकेका हुन्छन्, जुन इनहेरिट गरेका हुन्छन्, त्यो कुरालाई प्रिजर्भ गर्नु, प्रमोट गर्नु युवा पुस्ताको जिम्मेवारी हो. यो जिम्मेवारी लिनुपर्छ. द्याट इज what the writer wants to communicate, that is what the writer wants to share with us. Now I am going to show you some examples of religious and oral traditions that many generations, means our generations, our previous generations, have been following since time immemorial. Hinduism is supposed to be the oldest religion. Hinduism is eternal religion, means Hinduism is the mother of all religions of the world. And in Hinduism, you can find a number of oral traditions, a number of rituals, a number of oral traditions, means rituals, ceremonies, customs, right, that have been followed. For example, in ancient time, since ancient time, the Rishi Muniharu, and saints and sages, they used to perform a fire ceremony called Havan. महायज्ञ, यज्ञ र महायज्ञ गर्दाखेरि फायर सेरेमनी, त्यो द्याट इज कल्ड फायर सेरेमनी. यज्ञ, हवन जुन हुन्छ नि, होम जसलाई भन्छ नि, जस्तै हामी घरमा सत्यनारायण पूजा गर्दाखेरि हामी हवन गर्छौँ नि, गाईको घिउ हाल्छौँ, अनि द वुड अफ म्याङ्गो वुड, हैन म्याङ्गो प्लान्टको वुड हामी बाल्छौँ त्यसपछि धूपहरू बत्ती अरू अनेक प्रकारका मेटेरियल्सहरू त्यसमा राखेर हामी हवन गर्छौँ नि त्यो हवन के हो त व्हाट इज दैट इज ओरल ट्रेडिसन एक्जाम्पल अफ ओरल ट्रेडिसन ऋषि मुनिहरूले धेरै पहिले एन्सियन्ट टाइमदेखि नै त्यो हवन गर्ने परम्परा मतलब ट्रेडिसनको थालनी गरेका हुन् उहाँहरूले त्यो रिलिजियस पर्पसले राइट र त्यसको साइन्टिफिक रिजन पनि छ त्यसलाई साइन्सले पनि त्यसलाई एक्सेप्ट गरेको छ कि यस इट ह्याज द क्यापेसिटी टु प्युरिफाई द इन्भाइरोमेन्ट एन्ड पिपल जस्तै एकजना अमेरिकन साइकोलोजिस्ट ब्यारी र्याथर पुणे युनिभर्सिटीमा एउटा रिसर्च गरेका थिए त्यही अग्निहोत्रमा फायर सेरेमनीमा एउटा रिसर्च गरेका थिए तर रिसर्चबाट के थाहा पाएका थिए भने 10 ग्राम अफ काउज घी राइट गाईको घिउ 10 ग्राम गाईको घिउ आगोमा हालेर हवन गर्दाखेरि आगोमा हालिन्छ नि त्यसले टन्स अफ अक्सिजन प्रोड्युस गर्छ त फायर सेरेमनी हवन भयो एउटा एक्जाम्पल त्यसले वातावरणलाई शुद्ध पार्छ हाम्रो मन मस्तिष्कलाई शुद्ध पार्छ हाम्रो मनलाई शुद्ध पार्छ चित्त शुद्ध पार्छ राइट त्यसले नेगेटिभ एनर्जीहरूलाई टाढा राख्छ नेगेटिभ एनर्जीहरू जति पनि छ रोगका कारणहरू जति पनि छ त्यसलाई समाप्त गर्छ डिस्ट्रोय गर्छ त्यति पावर हुन्छ यो हवनमा त्यसै गरी अब अर्को ओरल ट्रेडिसन के छ भने ड्युरिङ सोलर लुनर एक्लिप्स ग्रहण लागेको जुन पिरियड हुन्छ नि त्यसलाई भन्छौँ हामी सुतक मिन्स इनअस्पिसियस पिरियड त्यो सुतक पिरियडमा हामी ग्रहण लागेको बेला भन्छौँ नि खानु हुँदैन पिउनु हुँदैन हैन भगवानको नाम लिनुपर्छ पूजापाठ गर्नुपर्छ ध्यान मेडिटेसन गर्नुपर्छ भनिन्छ नि त्यो एउटा ओरल ट्रेडिसन आउँदै गरेको पहिलेदेखि नै त्यसपछि त्यो ग्रहण समाप्त भएपछि व्हेन द सुतक इज मिन्स इनअस्पिसियस अशुभ बेला हैन अशुभ मानिन्छ ग्रहण लागेको बेलालाई त्यो बेला पार भइसकेपछि त्यो कटिसकेपछि अनि नुहाई गर्ने भगवानको नाम लिने हैन तिलहरू चामलहरू हामी टच गरेर विष्णुको नाम लिन्छौँ मिन्स द्याट इज अल्सो ओरल ट्रेडिसन एक्जाम्पल अफ ओरल ट्रेडिसन त्यस्तै अब नेवार कम्युनिटीमा छ इही इन नेवार कम्युनिटी जस्तै कि सुवर्ण कुमार हैन सँग बिहे गर्ने सुवर्ण कुमार बिहे गर्ने एउटा परम्परा छ नेवार कम्युनिटिज दे नो मोर अबाउट इही हैन त्यसपछि गुफावास हुन्छ नेवार कम्युनिटीमा त्यो पनि एक्जाम्पल्स अफ ओरल ट्रेडिसन त्यस्तै देउसी भैलो खेलिन्छ तिहारको बेलामा हैन तिहारमा हामी देउसी र भैलो खेल्छौँ नि यसै गरी हिन्दू धर्ममा मात्र होइन हिन्दू धर्ममा क्रिस्चियनिटीमा इस्लाममा धेरै अरू धर्महरूमा पनि के छ भने धेरै यस्ता ओरल ट्रेडिसन्सहरू छन् जसलाई सुपरस्टिसनको पनि सुपरस्टिसनमा आधारित छन् भन्छन् मान्छेहरूले मिन्स पिपल से द्याट दे डोन्ट ह्याभ एनी साइन्टिफिक ग्राउन्ड्स दे डोन्ट ह्याभ एनी साइन्टिफिक रिजन्स दे आर जस्ट सुपरस्टिसन अन्धविश्वास हो जस्तै बिरालोले बाटो काट्दियो भने अगाडि नबढ्ने अशुभ हुन्छ केही एक्सिडेन्ट हुन सक्छ त्यसै गरी बिहे फिक्स भइसकेपछि बिहेको कुरा फिक्स भइसकेपछि बेहुला बेहुलीले बिहेको दिनभन्दा अगाडि एकअर्काको अनुहार नहेर्ने त्यो नराम्रो हुन्छ त्यसै गरी कुनै हामी राम्रो काम गर्दैछौँ कुनै शुभ कार्य गर्दैछौँ जस्तै बिहे नै भयो अथवा कुनै ठुलो पूजा नै गर्दैछौँ भने त्यो दिन पानी पर्दियो भने शुभ भयो राम्रो भयो भन्छौँ त्यसरी अनेकौँ प्रकारका जस्तै सपनाहरूसँग पनि छ रिलेटेड कुराहरू सपनामा यो देख्यो भने यस्तो हुन्छ हैन सपनामा तिमीले यो कुरा देख्यो भने कोही मान्छे मरेको सपना देख्यो भने त्यसको आयु बढ्छ अरे भन्ने यस्तो कुराहरू ओरल ट्रेडिसन्सहरू चल्दै आएका छन् र यस्ता among these oral traditions some of the oral traditions they don't have scientific facts scientific reasons they are just superstition maybe and this is all that the essay tries to concentrate essay tries to focus on so I think this video will be helpful to you